from the vault, high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Talking Catholic, the official podcast of the Camden Diocese. This is your co-host, Mary McCusker, and I'm joined by Mike Walsh, and we are recording this today through Zoom. And Mike, the last time we did this was last week, and we happened to be recording on what I think was the windiest, rainiest day of 2020, and I was so scared that during the recording I would lose power. But you actually lost your internet connection twice.
I did. Yes, it was very annoying. I did not enjoy that part. It gave out just as we were talking about how I was expanding about how it's great that everyone sort of embraced technology and our numbers have gone way up on all of our social media platforms, and it's mostly people 65 and above, and we see this the older generation coming forward, and I'm all excited and everything like that, and then all of a sudden the screen freezes, and I suddenly realize, and I lost my internet connection. So hopefully, however, today is a nice, beautiful day outside. Actually,
polar opposite.
Yeah, I feel bad. Actually, we're recording this on Thursday, the 7th, I think. And it is a gorgeous day outside. I was half tempted to record it outside, but I know we'd pick up the wind noise. It's a little breezy out there. So, well,
now our listeners can hear our sneezing and coughing and everything that comes with this beautiful weather.
Yes,
but that's okay.
Pollen count is definitely up. But no, and actually, just for anyone who didn't listen to last week's episode, I encourage you to go back and listen to it because it was great. Jamie Reynolds was a fantastic interviewee, and it was a topic that we don't do a lot of conversation about, affordable housing for seniors. So if you haven't had a chance yet, make sure you check it out because that was a particularly good one, and I want to make sure that people listen to it. But now we're going to have one that I've actually been dying to have for such a long time. For years, I've heard this name, thrown around the halls of Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Camden with reverence and joy and this like almost a supernatural nature to this person. And I'm so happy that we've finally been able to cajole her onto the podcast so that people could hear more about these great stories right from the horse's mouth. So, Mary, who do we have on with us today?
So, well, I share the same those same sentiments, Mike, because I've heard this name for 3 years now, and I'm lucky enough to have met this very special guest today. I think I say that every time when we introduce a guest, but this is really a treat. Jennifer Dyer is joining us today, and she has led so many initiatives, not just in the Camden Diocese, but on a national level and across the country with Catholic Charities USA, and has just had a huge hand in shaping the agency and what it is today. So welcome to Jennifer Dyer, and thank you for joining us. How are you?
Thank you. Gosh, and thank you both for such lovely words. I'm glad this is being recorded because I will definitely play that opening for my family. Oh. They don't always have such nice things to say about me.
Just to be clear, I said other people have said these things about you. I have never once said anything even remotely about that. I have found you to be the bane of my existence. However, other people truly seem to love you, Jennifer. So this is...
No, I did hear that clear distinction, Mike. Okay, but it's still nice of you to share what other people have said about me.
No problem. Okay. So, Jennifer, you spent about how many years at Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Camden?
I was there for 12 years.
12 years. Okay.
Yeah. 12 fantastic years.
What, I mean, in the beginning, so many years ago, what brought you to Catholic Charities?
So I had started off my career working at Catholic Relief Services. And then when I got married, we moved up to Manhattan, and I was working for Catholic Near East Welfare Association. And we knew we didn't want to settle up there. My sister lived in South Jersey, wanted to come to South Jersey. And what I really wanted to do was go back to school and get my master's degree. And I liked the MPA program at Rutgers. And I had already spent, probably about 5 years working for the church. And I didn't want to not work for the church in my professional career. And so I was looking for opportunities in South Jersey that I could live my faith and work living my faith while going back and getting my master's degree. And happened to happened to be an opening at Catholic Charities in Camden it was a program director. And you'll appreciate this as media folks. I found the job on the internet and I was really excited. And I wrote up a great letter and my resume and I sent it off. And Kevin Connor was the acting executive director at the time. And he called me to say, good Lord, that job was filled years ago. I have no idea why it's on the website, but I got something else that I want to talk to you about. And so he brought me in for a conversation and I was hired as the director for disaster relief following September 11th and the terrorist attacks. And so that was my first role at Catholic Charities.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that was your first role, Jennifer.
That was my very first role. Yeah. And so we had programs that dealt with crisis counseling. We had programs that met the needs for those who had lost family members, for those who had lost income. We had a program that ran in the schools for a while to talk to kids about what had happened. So yeah, lots of different programs.
So, maybe we need to go even a little further back. I've had the pleasure of working with social workers throughout almost the entirety of my professional career, so 25 years or so. And they're, how can I say this, the most unique people I've ever met in my entire life. And I mean that lovingly, but they're a special breed. What got you into social work even farther back than 12 years ago?
So just for clarification, I am not a social worker.
What got you into the social work field? Sorry.
Is in public administration. So I have always been much more interested in the program design and implementation.
Okay.
When my first professional job was at Catholic Relief Services. And my father had worked for Catholic Relief Services for 30 plus years. And he was retiring as I was entering the workforce. And so I grew up around all things church and social justice. When I was a kid, during the Ethiopian famine, my father would be coming back from Ethiopia to share stories about what he had seen, what he had witnessed, the work that the church was doing there. I remember with the hostages in Beirut, there was a priest from Catholic Relief Services who was one of the hostages, and so I remember as a kid praying for his release. I think his name was Father Jenko, if I'm correct in that. But anyway, so the social mission, the social arm of the church was always kind of part of my life way back when. And so when I finished my undergrad, I started working for Catholic Relief Services as an administrative assistant in a department called Executive Public Policy Liaison. Mm-hmm. And that department was like this little think tank inside of CRS. And so it was the information house between the executive office, between what was happening at USCCB, between what was happening in the field. And it was kind of where all this information came together and simmered and went to the right people. And so I was an admin, and this was, a long time ago. So I was like making photocopies and putting it in an envelope, sending it to people. But it was this great opportunity for me to really see what was happening, what these people were thinking about, these great minds thinking about in terms of how does the church provide love and relief to people all over the globe, And so I always loved that aspect of being able to kind of see the big picture. And so I think social work is much more of a one-on-one basis. So I was always interested in the program design. So when I went for my master's, I did it in public administration.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. The fact that you stayed within this world, I find is fascinating. I've been blessed to work in nonprofits twice in my life, each for the longest period of time. I've had a lot of jobs. I worked for an organization called Volunteers of America for 4 years and 7 months, and I've now worked for the Diocese of Camden for what will be 4 years, 7 months, and 1 day on the 4th of July of this year.
Oh, right.
So I only have a few more months to go before this is the longest I've ever held a job. But and not because I get fired a lot, though has been known to happen. Just in the PR world, we tend to bounce around a lot. So, but the two jobs I've had, and I've worked for corporate entities and medical field and stuff like that. Working in nonprofits was the only thing that ever brought me any joy, honestly. Where like I woke up every morning and was happy to go to work and knew that I was doing something bigger. Listening to you talk, Jennifer, I get the impression that that's sort of your mindset as well. Could you even imagine yourself working someplace else?
I couldn't. I really couldn't. And I feel so incredibly blessed that I have gotten to spend my entire professional career working for the church. There's just this great intersection of being able to integrate the way you live your life on Sunday at Mass with the work that you do day in and day out. And the people that you work with, even when people are at their worst and having a tough day, there's still this just goodness and commitment and passion to the work that they're doing that just comes through. And I've just been so privileged to work alongside of incredible people all over the country, the world, and I cannot imagine I can't imagine my life doing anything outside of church work. But I also really am impressed and amazed by folks who are able to find meaning in work that isn't as directly related to their faith. Yeah. Because people do, they find real meaning and that work is meaningful and we need it. I always say I'm a little more simple. I need a very direct connection to help me find meaning in my work.
You talked about your early career working with Catholic Relief Services, and I've always been of the mind that I think a lot of Americans don't really understand CRS, oftentimes because it has to do with work outside of the United States. The only time people hear about it is when they get their CSR collection envelope in once a year and put it in their collection plate, and they see some of the stuff we put in for instance, the Catholic Star Herald about it. Can you tell us a little bit about Catholic Relief Services, just how huge it is and what they do?
Yeah, so they have an office in Baltimore. I don't know how many people work there now. When I was there, there were probably 200 people in headquarters, thousands of people that work for it all around the globe. They're in about, I think, 90 countries, or at least that's what they used to be in. I haven't checked their website in a while. And in all of those countries, they would have an office that would have, in all likelihood, one international or maybe two international staff. But then the staff is largely made up of national people who are running programs to improve the lives and livelihoods of all of those in that community. Mm-hmm. It's incredible work that they do.
Yeah. And it sounds like, considering your earliest memories in terms of that sort of life come from CRS, it really looks like it made an impact on you.
It did. It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. When I was a kid, one of my favorite toys was this little wooden dog, and he had really long ears and he had wheels. And so when you pulled the string, the really long ears would flip-flop around his head. And I don't know why this was a great toy, but we didn't have a lot of money and it was one of my few toys, and I would drag that dog everywhere. When I was probably about 10, my dad brought some pictures home from a trip he had taken to Southeast Asia. I think it might have been Cambodia, trying to picture this little girl, but she was about 2 years old, and she was pulling on a string a Pepsi can that somebody had fastened ears to and put wheels on.
Oh no.
So it was, and it was like such a realization to me of, because we didn't have a lot. My dad worked for the church. There were 6 of us. We lived in Brooklyn. We really did not have anything. But just that realization of how much more we had than others had, and how joyful people could be in crafting and making and bringing kind of their own joy into their own space, And I don't know who made that little toy for her, but that picture was always so powerful to me.
Yeah. Oh, I love hearing that.
That's a great story, Jennifer. I didn't know that you grew up in that kind of environment with your dad working and, having that global perspective even at such a young age. It sounds like it was very formative.
It was. He would come home and he would tell these stories, or even just where he would go off to. He traveled a lot when we were growing up. We never lived overseas. I think that was too much for my mother to consider with 6 children.
Yeah.
But he would be gone for 3 weeks at a time.
Oh my goodness.
Whether it was because of a disaster or just programmatic work, or just because if you're going to travel to Indonesia, you might as well then stop in Vietnam for a few days, and kind of do things, work like that. So he'd be gone for a long time. And back then, we didn't talk, right? We would write him letters so that he could read them on the long plane rides. And then we would hear from him when he came home, and he would
no Zoom conferences like right now.
No Zoom conference calls, nothing. So when he would come home, my mother was probably like, the kids are yours for the next day. And, she'd take off someplace, but he'd just share with us what he saw, what he witnessed, and it was always really, I think the work was just as powerful to him as it is to me. And so I think he recognized that sharing what he saw was just as important as the work he did when he was over there.
Yeah. Jennifer, I have to ask, are you the oldest sibling?
No. Do I seem like I would be the oldest? That's quite a compliment.
You do, because you just have that leadership ability. Like, I could totally picture you as the oldest sibling, but
again, I'm really glad this is recorded, because I'm going to play it for my siblings who have done nothing but call me, the spoiled baby.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I am the youngest.
You're wow.
Mary, you have the worst radar. The entire time she's talking, I'm thinking 6 kids, she's the baby of the family. Everything about her suggests that she's the baby of the family, but that's fine, whatever. Well, you know what? That's because Mary's the baby of her family, and she, I don't know, maybe she can't make the connection. But I was, it's funny, you were talking about your dad, and this is kind of a little bit off topic, but I got me to thinking that, I work for the church, obviously, and I'm a dude, and I got a kid. I actually don't talk about work at all at home, and in my job, certainly not disaster relief, but there are a lot of things that I have to deal with that for whatever reason, I've just never been comfortable about talking to my son about. And I'm wondering if I'm doing him a disservice now, listening to you.
So I think I would say 2 things. One, I think talking about it is always a good thing. Mm-hmm. But the other thing I would say is that he's probably hearing and paying attention to a lot more than you think he's hearing and paying attention to.
That's true.
We play in this new reality under the blanket of COVID-19. We've been playing virtual Pictionary with my husband's family, and they have 2 little girls. And last week, my 8-year-old had to draw a motel, and she's not always played by the rules, clear on the rules. And so she started to write these letters on the front of the building. And so after we didn't get it, we say to her, "What were you trying to write?" And she said, "Free. It's a free motel so that homeless people have a place to go and stay." Oh my goodness. And as she said that, I thought every conversation I've been having lately for work has had to deal with what the shelters are doing, where homeless people are going, as the jails release people early, where are those people going? And that is not a conversation I've been having with her. But
she picked up on it. Wow.
Yeah, she was paying attention.
What kids pick up on. Oh my goodness.
Oh, man.
But I do think that you should make a concerted effort to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Because I do think it's important for them to hear from us, the values and what is important and how we make changes. I was having a conversation with my son the other day about power differentials, and it was this whole side conversation, but I said to him, when people have a lot of money and they get to build buildings and put their names on the buildings, they always feel seen and heard. But there's a lot of people in this world that don't feel seen and heard, and if they don't have the money and they don't have a loud voice and they don't have a big job, they don't feel seen and heard. And it's our job to kind of help them be seen and feel heard. And I think those are important conversations to have for kids, and they take it to the playground, and then hopefully they take it out in the real world when they grow up. We'll see.
And I have to compliment your children, Jennifer. Mike, I don't know if you know this, but
No.
Jennifer and I are currently down the street from each other. She lives just a short distance away from me, and I had the pleasure of doing a short photo shoot with her family. And Jennifer, your kids are the most mature children I have ever met. Mike, you know this as a photographer, what it's like to photograph kids.
It's the worst thing in the world. That's why I refuse to do it.
With Jennifer's family, it was the best thing. They were so cooperative, so polite. There was no argue. I mean, they remind me of you a lot, Jennifer. They are just wonderful.
Yeah, it's like bribery, Mary. Right before you showed up, they were promised something big. I don't remember what, but I'm quite sure
that's the secret.
Something big to behave for the photo shoot.
Oh, that's very sweet.
They were great.
Well, that's awesome to hear. And well, thank you for the parenting tips too. I can always use those. So we talked a little bit about, the CRS background and your life growing up, but now let's talk about your work with domestic church a little bit more. So you had your time at CRS. You looked to come to South Jersey. You're from Brooklyn. We all love New Yorkers in our bones. New Yorkers are the best. We all know that.
That's right.
Well, my mother was born in Brooklyn, so the least I can do is say nice things about it. Of course, our boss is from the Bronx, so we say nothing but nice things about New York in my household. So you come down to South Jersey and you hook up with Catholic Charities, and I'm curious, how much of a shift was that from the CRS days to the Catholic Charities?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So when I came to South Jersey and I started working for Catholic Charities, my mind was that I was going to get my master's degree and then I was going to go back to international work, because international work was where my heart was. International work was, it felt more meaningful. It felt more exciting. It felt more significant. And in my mind at that time, this was 2002, I thought the work at Catholic Charities was mainly focused on soup kitchens. This is just my mind. I didn't know a lot about the work that Catholic Charities did. And so when I came here, I thought this would be a nice job to have while I went back to school. Then I'll get back to the international arena. And right after I came here, Kevin Hickey became the executive director. And, Kevin is just an incredible visionary. And he sees the big picture and he creates these incredible opportunities for people. And over time, he kept giving me these opportunities and he kept coming up with these great programs that I realized I didn't want to go back. That anything that I thought about the international arena was also true for the domestic work of the church at that point. I don't know, neither of you were here for Project One, but I'm sure you've heard about Project One, which was after Hurricane Katrina and Rita too. The Diocese of Camden sent more than 500 people down to the Gulf to help with the rebuilding efforts. And that was all Kevin Hickey. It was all his idea.
I think you would say it's all you, Jennifer, because that's what he's told me.
He has this great big vision and he's like, this would be incredible. And he sees why it would be incredible and he sees how it would impact people. And then he gracefully hands it off to somebody, right? To put some meat on it and make it happen. And so, I was fortunate enough to be the person standing beside him when he said, this project needs to happen in our diocese. And so I got to travel all over our diocese to meet all the incredible people in our diocese, right? And to kind of journey with them and to listen to their stories about how they were impacted by going to the Gulf region, right? And not swinging a hammer, but the other stuff that happens when they encountered people who really are living on the margins and didn't have a safety net and lost everything. And then they were able to bring those stories back to South Jersey and share them with everybody else that wasn't able to go for one reason or another. And so it was 12 incredible years that I got to be involved in really exciting projects that were happening here.
And is that kind of, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, what was interesting was, so you go to Katrina, you do that, Katrina and Rita, you do all that work. And then at some point, a few years later, you end up having to do all that work in your own backyard when Superstorm Sandy rolls through.
So it's interesting, Mike. So when I worked for Catholic Relief Services, I was an administrative assistant, but then I was an analyst for the Southeast Asia team. So I worked with the team in Vietnam, East Timor. And so I was at least always tangentially involved in disasters, because there's a lot of disasters there, right? This was the Timor referendum. So there was a lot of war in Timor and Indonesia at the time. In Vietnam, there's always flooding in the Mekong Delta, so I was always involved in disaster work. And then when I came to Catholic Charities in Camden, Catholic Charities USA asked me to be part of their national disaster response team. And so I traveled all over the country responding to disasters, wildfires, hurricanes, right? And then when Sandy was hitting our shores, I called Kim Burgo at Catholic Charities USA, who's the vice president for disaster operations, who I had worked with on the national team. And I said, Kim, we got a hurricane coming. Who are you going to send here to help us? And she said, I'm not sending anybody. You're there. This full panic set in where, because it was happening here in my backyard, you experienced it on such an emotional level that you just shut down. And so I spent about 10 minutes on the phone with Kim, and Kim can be a wonderful cheerleader, right? And so she's like, you did this and you did this and you can do this. And I have faith in you. You've got this. I do. You're right, Kim. I do. Right. I hung up with her and I thought, I do not have this. And so I called a colleague of mine in Baton Rouge, Carol Sproul, and spent 2 hours on the phone with her, kind of walking through the plan of what I'm supposed to do. And it was all stuff that I knew, but all of a sudden it was my diocese, my agency, my backyard.
Yeah, when you lose that professional detachment, it's very difficult to do this job, which is why it's so beneficial to have outsiders who can come in, like yourself, and really give that kind of clear guidance without worrying about, is their home uprooted? What's the power like here? My sister-in-law is over here and she's got no power, and not having to worry about that. So there is this network that Catholic Charities has created over the years really does become beneficial to the other dioceses as they get hammered. So it's amazing.
Absolutely. And the other part of it is, the more you do this work, and you both know this, you have different relationships in the diocese, right? And some are wonderful and some can be challenging just because of the things that you're doing day in and day out. And so I think when the disaster is in your own diocese, you also feel like, oh, I can't call that person because they weren't helpful to me on that project. But when you come in with fresh eyes from another diocese, it's all just strategy. I need this person. I'll have this conversation with him. And it's there's a lot of clarity that disappears when it's in your diocese. Yeah. So that was interesting. And it really Sandy gave me a lot of insight and a lot more probably patience for what people are dealing with when the disaster's in their own diocese. Because you get like, just do it. This is what we need to do.
And it's also when it's in your own diocese, I can imagine it was probably challenging because the staff who are, supposed to be responding to this disaster are also personally impacted. Their homes may have been flooded, so the people who you think are able to respond, they still have their own personal lives to tend to in the wake of a disaster like that.
Yeah, and that's the real beauty of Catholic Charities USA having deployment teams that can come in for the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks to just kind of get everything operational while staff can tend to themselves and their families, right? They can make sure they're okay, their mom's okay, their roof's okay, whatever it is they need to do.
So let's talk, let's talk about that a little bit more, because I really wanted to have a conversation about sort of the larger nature of Catholic Charities. And that is one of the things that's interesting about it, is that I use this phrase a lot with many things that are about the Catholic Church, but in a lot of sense, we're all sort of a loose confederation. All of these organizations are sort of tangentially attached to each other, and in the Catholic Charities world, it's kind of the same thing. Each of these diocesan level Catholic Charities are independent organizations, but they're sort of interconnected through Catholic Charities USA. has it always been the nature of Catholic Charities of, say, the Diocese of Camden to help out, the Diocese of Baton Rouge? Or is this something that sort of evolved over time in your experience, Jennifer?
So are you asking specifically about disaster or just in general?
Both, actually.
Okay. So I think that I would say prior to Kim Burgo coming to Catholic Charities USA, and that would have been in 2000 and maybe 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. I think she's been there about 10 years. Prior to that, the relationships didn't as much go through Catholic Charities USA as they were with each other. So one Catholic Charities might have a relationship with another Catholic Charities. And Camden might call CCUSA to say, hey, I'm looking to do a feeding program. Do you know a Catholic Charities agency that's doing a feeding program? And Catholic Charities USA, kind of having that whole network picture, might be able to say, oh, you should talk to San Francisco. They've got a great program. But the linkages were really directly between agency to agency. When Kim Burgo came to Catholic Charities USA, and I should say she came from Catholic Relief Services. So we actually had worked together at Catholic Relief Services. She brought with her this sort of more of an international model, which comes with like deployment teams. And so she really put in place this much more formalized structure where staff from around the network would receive training and then could go on a roster to be deployed. And so it formalized that deployment experience through the network. Okay. But I do think those relationships, I mean, they've always been there, but probably less formal and not as much through CCUSA.
Okay.
And it is amazing to see. I know at Catholic Charities, all staff, I think this was a couple of years ago, but I think that, this is something that's routinely done, were to fill out a paper about skill sets. And I'm thinking, like, what could I ever have to offer? I work in communications and marketing, but it was everything from, which languages do you speak to are you trained in CPR? And I like everything you could possibly think of. And as I'm going through this list, I'm thinking, wow, like I can check off some of these boxes. And sure enough, I can't remember if it was Hurricane Irma, but there were several hurricanes that came through a couple years ago. Hurricane Irma, Harvey, Maria. I can't remember which one it was, but I remember somebody put out a call to all the networks of Catholic Charities saying, we need people who can operate forklifts. And somebody from our accounting department said, I can operate a forklift. I used to do it, before I came to Catholic Charities, and bam, he was deployed. And it just worked out so beautifully. So that infrastructure and the planning, it's just so beneficial. And I've seen that time and time again. The best time to prepare is now.
Absolutely, right? Best time to prepare is now so that we can get that list going, because the needs are so different during every disaster. And I think we often narrowly think about our skills as the work that we're doing and our current job title, right? But there are so many needs that are necessary during a disaster.
Sure.
Like the forklift.
I know you, so you were in South Jersey, and then you moved to Gary, Indiana, right?
Gary, Indiana, yes.
Where you continued your work with Catholic Charities. Can you tell us a little about how that was?
Yeah, so at the end of 2014, I accepted the position as executive director for Catholic Charities in Gary, Indiana. And Gary and Camden have a lot in common in terms of kind of being at the top of those bad lists, most dangerous, low number of high school graduates, lots of crime, lots of drugs.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of similarities between the two cities. And it was a really great opportunity for me. I had never lived really off of the East Coast. I did my undergrad outside of Baltimore, did my graduate work at Rutgers, New York and New Jersey. Yeah. I just had never lived any place off of the East Coast. And so this was an opportunity to kind of live in the Midwest for a bit. We were out there for about 3 years, great people. Right after I became the executive director, they appointed a new bishop. In fact, it was a little uncomfortable because Bishop Melzik appointed me as the executive director for Catholic Charities. And then before I moved my family out to Gary, Indiana, they named a new bishop.
Oh my goodness.
And so it was kind of like, should I call the new bishop and ask if he still wants me to come? He's not interested in me coming out there. So that was a little awkward, because this guy didn't get to hire me. But I started on December 1st, and then the new bishop, Bishop Hein, his installation, I think, was in February. And so we kind of started together at the same time. And it was an exciting time in the diocese. There was a synod, so I got to be heavily involved with the synod, which was incredible. There was a lot of great stuff that was happening out there.
Yeah.
Left behind a lot of good friends that I still keep in touch with.
Oh, I'm sure.
And how about from you, from going from an industrious worker to the boss? Like, how much of a transition was that for you?
Yeah.
You seem to have, unlike what Mary seems to say, I think you seem to have a lot of boss-like qualities at all times. So it's like, I'm like...
If I'm not mistaken, I did say that earlier. If not, I was thinking it, Jennifer. Don't listen to him.
Yeah. By the time I left Catholic Charities, I was the assistant director.
Yeah.
And so I think the phrase that Kevin always used was that that everybody reported through me. They didn't report to me. They reported to Kevin Hickey, but it kind of all went through me. And so there wasn't much of a change in terms of, other than I felt like all of a sudden I didn't have my life jacket, because I couldn't go to Kevin. I didn't have him backing me up to say, yeah, that's the right decision or no. And in a way I did, because I would still call him and say, can I talk this through with you?
Right.
But, in terms of that didn't change. It is, it's lonely to be the executive director. You can't be friends with anybody. And so when you move to a new city and you can't be friends with anybody you work with, making new friends and developing relationships with people who maybe want to be your friend because they want exposure to something that you have access to, so that gets a little tricky. But yeah, it was really interesting to be out there.
And I know Kevin was, I don't think he would mind me sharing this, but when I had mentioned to him.
You've met Kevin before, right?
I think I did. Tall guy.
Yeah. I'm worried because Mary says, I don't think he'd mind. He minds every time we talk about him. He would like to exist in a void where no one discusses Kevin. But that's what's so much fun about bringing him up on the podcast is A, he can't stop us, and B, we can talk about it and say whatever we want. So please enjoy. I'm very much going to enjoy you telling the story about Kevin right now. Go right ahead.
Now that there's been so much buildup, I just wanted to say that he has said many, many times before I even met you, Jennifer, he always pointed to your leadership and, your connection with Catholic social teaching and your ability to just lead staff and connect with them. But he has said to me many times that you made him a better leader. And he did share with me an email that he sent to the whole agency in 2014 when you left. And this is just like the sappy person in me. There were tears in my eyes. It was just I said, why do I ever bother writing anything when someone like him can write like this? But the kind of farewell, it was just, it described you to a T. And I know everybody at Catholic Charities, your name still comes up all the time in Camden. So I had to share that with you and hopefully.
Thank you. That's kind of beautiful. I think that everybody, and Mike, you have the right idea here. I think everybody needs to leave a job at some point because people said so many lovely, wonderful, nice things about me when I left. And I don't think they would have said any of those things if I had stuck around. So it was nice to,
That's why I leave so many jobs, just to get complimented. That's it. That's the only reason why. I can't wait
to see you go. They're full of compliments when you're walking out the door.
That's right.
Just quit. I could use some of that right now.
But no, I mean, when I left, it was really with mixed emotions. I was excited about the new opportunity, but I'd been here for 12 years. I had grown up here, I mean, that's a long time, 12 years. And Kevin, I mean, he is an incredible mentor and friend, and just has done so much for me personally and professionally over those years, and continues to.
Yeah. And I know he's the board member of the trustees for Catholic Charities USA. And I know right now you do some work with Catholic Charities USA. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I lead the Agency Capacity Initiative, which works with 5 Catholic Charities agencies in the Midwest to help them build strengthen their agency in such a way that they can better prepare for and respond to disaster events. And what's interesting about this work is that most of the disasters that these agencies are preparing for and responding to will never make CNN. These are not your big disasters. It's small localized tornadoes. It's repetitive flooding hitting the same communities day in and day out. And so there's not the money that comes with it. Disasters come with a lot of opportunities. People tend to open up their wallets to give during those times. And so it's really trying to creatively think about how you do this work when you don't have the extra resources to do it, and you don't have kind of the spotlight shining on it like you do with a disaster like Harvey or Maria or even COVID, the pandemic.
Yeah. And does the work involve, leading a team of staff, or what's a average day look like for you?
So it's a 3-year grant cycle. Okay. And so I've been working with the same 5 agencies for 2.5 years, and we kind of take them through a process where they do their hazards assessments and their vulnerability assessments. Who are the folks in your community that are more likely to be impacted by a disaster? And, the answer is it's the folks that Catholic Charities agencies work with day in and day out on a regular basis, right? And so how do you think about what that work looks like during a disaster? And what are your goals as an agency? Because we know every Catholic Charities agency is really different. Their programs are unique. It is deliberate because a Catholic Charities is the local church's response to the needs of that community. And so what are your particular goals? And then I help kind of to resource them so they can achieve those goals and metrics.
Yeah.
So it's interesting work.
I'm curious if someone wanted to follow your path. I don't think there's any way to follow your path because you have a very unique path. But if people wanted to get into this kind of an industry, what kind of education background do they need? I there's a lot of people that I know that would like to be helpful and supportive and want to work for Catholic Charities, but they're not necessarily, much like yourself and myself, they're not necessarily social work types, right. But they really feel like they want to be able to help in some other way from more of an administrative perspective. What is that path to becoming Jen Dyer too?
I don't think the world needs more than one Jen Dyer. I'll tell you.
And the world needs as many Jen Dyers as we can get.
A lot of people that would agree with me on that want plenty. I think that when I first joined Catholic Charities in 2002, it was mostly social workers that worked for agencies, and I think that over the past, 18 years, the work has become different, right? We don't just look at that immediate relief efforts of how do we bring relief to you today, right? People need food, they need a place to lay their head, they need to feel safe. That work is really important. But Catholic Charities is also called to do kind of that long-term planning about how do we change the systems and structures that force people into these corners where they don't have food for their families. And I think that work is so, it needs creativity And it needs such innovations that I think it can be from any field. I think that people with an economic background, now when I work with people at Catholic Charities agencies, the ones that they're talking about are ones that come with either an economic background or a housing background. They have all of these really different paths that they have taken to get here. And so they bring those experiences with them. And I think that's what makes us unique. That's what makes us work, right? I mean, we each get different talents. Mm-hmm. God gives us everything we need to work together. And so I don't think there is one path. I think we all bring everything with us to the table. And I think that's what's important, that we're bringing it all to the table every day.
Yeah.
No, that's a great way of looking at it. And actually one that I tend to agree with. I look at my path. For that matter, I look at Mary's path. I can pretty much guarantee that 5 years ago, Mary McCusker never once thought she'd be working for Catholic Charities. And now, when I talking about Catholic Charities in general and how it tends to bring people together and mold them, Mary, one of the things I've liked most about working with Catholic Charities, in particular the one in the Diocese of Camden, is it's so focused on making sure that people are trained well and that they have the ability to go places. So, Mary, your colleagues have been deployed multiple times to disaster areas, and Catholic Charities has done a great job of training them. You yourself went through training, a year ago?
Yes. And I think that might have been the last time I saw Jennifer in person. This was in Jacksonville. And again, this was one of those situations where Kevin said, would you be interested in going to this? And like you said earlier, Jennifer, he's somebody who's always wants to send people out of their comfort zone, put new opportunities and experiences in front of them. So I was really lucky for that opportunity. And that this was a training. And I remember once again, like, I'm marketing. What on earth could I learn from this? But there was so much that I got out of it, and a lot that I took back with me. And it's funny because, well, not funny, but now that in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was stuff that I had in the back of my head leaving that training, especially, the best time to prepare is now. And not all disasters are natural disasters and hurricanes. And, every person, regardless of what their title or, the textbook definition of what they do, they need to be prepared. And that helped me a lot. It was a great conference. And I know colleagues, some of my colleagues have also joined, and a lot of them have been deployed, and I've only been here 3 years, but I know people have been deployed to California when there were forest fires there, Colorado, Texas, Louisiana. I mean, Puerto Rico. There have been so many places and different types of disasters too. They all have a different nature, different needs, but, people are ready and sometimes just a couple days notice to go. It's amazing that we have that connection with all the other agencies.
And I would say no agency deploys more people than Camden. And Camden is not the biggest agency. Camden, Camden might be right in the middle of the pack in terms of size, but nobody deploys more people than Camden. And that's Kevin's commitment both to the network and to providing opportunities for individuals to grow. He's got this really great way of seeing the potential in people and what they can do and what their gifts are, and just then kind of providing the opportunity for them to do all that they were meant to do.
Yeah.
That really is true. I didn't want to hire Mary 3 years ago, and Kevin talked me into it, and he's been right the entire time, and it's so annoying because he holds it over my head. It's really irritating.
I remember being terrified at that interview. And you know what you said earlier, Jennifer, how, you kind of made that switch from the global perspective to, okay, now before I came to Catholic Charities, I had just been abroad for a year and a half. I had worked a year in Korea and then traveled through Southeast Asia on the way home. And I remember thinking, I'll find a job for a little and then I'm gone. I'm coming back out. Like, that's where I belong. But, when I got home, a couple weeks went by and I see this email pop up, Catholic Charities looking for communications coordinator. I said, wow. And I read the website and I said, oh my goodness, all of these, Matthew 25, the connection to Catholic social teaching. I said, this is what I want. And luckily Kevin was there, or else Mike would have said goodbye and I wouldn't be here today.
It's true. It's a good thing he was. He saw something in you that I didn't. And but you're absolutely right, is that Catholic Charities, particularly Kevin, but Catholic Charities in general, seem to be does a great job of bringing people in and finding what their real gifts are. And just, it truly amazes me. It really does. Because I am a heartless human being and I don't feel any of these things, but I read that letter and my response to Mary, the letter that Kevin wrote about you, and my response to Mary was, yeah, it's cool. It's like, it's nice.
And I'm there like, oh my gosh, but getting teary-eyed.
But, for all of and in a lot of ways, I'm an avatar for the public in the sense that, I'm sure there are other people who think like me. We're just nuts and bolts, but I'm so happy that people like you exist to temper people like me. And I mean this to both of you, because,
I was going to say, who are you talking to?
Both of you. Both of you are wonderful, heartfelt people. And I've had the pleasure of now working with both of you off and on for the last couple of years. And the last project I had any part of with Catholic Charities of any major thing was when we were doing the pilgrimages to the border. And I remember, it was the first time I think I met Jennifer, or around then. And Kevin tells me about this woman that I should work with, and I meet her and I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. And then I got to know her a little bit. I was like, oh man, she's really good at this stuff. But going back to that pilgrimage ended up for me being sort of a composite of everything Catholic Charities was about. It was the true desire of that pilgrimage was to educate the pilgrims who were going down to the border and to learn for themselves what the issues at the border were. The Texas-Mexico border. And it wasn't political, and it was open to anybody, and nobody was proselytizing to them. It was nothing. It was like, go down, be amongst the people, accompany these people, and make your own decision. You need more than what you're seeing on cable television at night. Right. And I've seen that same pattern with everything that Catholic Charities does. It's like, learn for yourself, come and join us, see what's actually happening.
Right.
It's
all in the spirit of Catholic social teaching. And how does that intertwine? And Jennifer had a huge part in shaping those pilgrimages. And, how do we keep Catholic social teaching in mind as we go on this journey and when we come back? And, having both that faith component and that amazing ability to organize and lead. I mean, as
we're wrapping up, we have you asked, you're leading to a great question, Mary, which is, and one that we didn't really touch on a lot, but in the last 2.5 minutes, I wanted to hit it give it one last chance for some air, which was your spiritual life, Jennifer. It's certainly come across in our conversation that it's important to you. Has it ever been impacted negatively or positively by the work you do? Like, have you had to rely on it sometimes to keep you up, and sometimes did it take a hit?
So I think the answer is yes to both, and for the same reasons. I think that the work that we do is really emotionally charged. Meeting with people when they are struggling can feel burdensome, right? To kind of try and lift that burden off of them. It's hard to hear those stories. And so that's that emotional side of it can feel really heavy. But then what I think you turn to is that, you said the right word, Mike, it's that accompaniment, right? And that's what we're called to do, and do it together and to lighten the load of everybody by carrying it together.
That's a great way of putting it. And Jennifer, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast finally. I don't know why it took us this long to get you on, but I'm glad we finally did.
That was my fault. I'll own up to it.
You're right. It is Mary's fault. But I really do appreciate it. And I hope our listeners got a new perspective on what it is, both Catholic Charities and Catholic Relief Services, and just, as you put it, Mary, what Matthew 25 really means. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mary, for putting this together. And we'll talk to everybody else soon.